It computes for me that you want to figure out what is it at my core that I value. What are my values? What matters to me? If I don't have anything standing in my way, what do I want to do that's important to me, and how do I want to spend my time?
I was trying to think when we met each other. So it would have been 2007 or was it 2008? Something like that, right? It was at a PF Chang's or something?
It was 2007 or maybe even 2006.
Maybe.
Because it definitely wasn't 2008. By 2008, we're kind of into the swing of things movie-wise. It was before that.
Right, we were already, we would have been living together then. I lived on the pea-stained dog mattress.
Yeah, when you lived on the pea-stained dog mattress, at what year was that? When did you leave college?
That would have been, so I left college after that, but that would have been the summer of 2007.
Okay, I think maybe early 2007, possibly like late 2006.
That sounds right. Right.
So that's, how many years is that? Is that like 15 years?
Yeah, that's crazy.
Jesus.
That's fair. That is an insane amount of time. It's also weird now. Like, I don't know, as you get older, you stop, like I had to ask Samantha how old I was the other day. I was like, how old am I again? But like also that I could say something that's 15 years and that's not half or more of my life is also a new thing I'm having to think about.
Yeah, I remember when I was a kid, my dad used to brag to me. He'd be like, I've had this down jacket for 20 years. And it seemed, at the time, I was like, wow, that seems like a really long time. And now I'm like, yeah, I think I've got like a bunch of stuff that's 20 years old. Like it moves fast.
You and I talked about Chuck Klosterman, and I interviewed him, but he never talked about this in the book, I don't think. But like when someone pointed out to me that the 90s, which is the subject of his new book, we are as distant from the 90s as the 90s were from the 60s, is like appallingly, hits you appallingly hard. You're like, whoa, okay, that is like crazy.
Well, yeah, because when we were kids, I mean, you and I are a little bit different in age, but I remember in the 90s being in like middle school, folks were really into that late 60s, 70s stuff, and it felt decidedly retro, entirely from a different era. And to think about it now as being like, oh, that was just people being into what was 20 years ago. It's the same thing as the 90s now. Like, I don't know. It makes me look at that past very differently. It felt like we weren't just looking back on a couple of decades, because that's what everyone always does. It felt like we were looking back on a very specific time and place in American culture where you're like, oh, this is the retro time. But like, no, it's just a couple decades back.
But also I feel like the world seemed like, and this is one of the things he talks about in the 90s, which is that like the 60s to the 90s felt like an unfathomable gulf between them. Like these are different worlds, right? Like the 60s was still a part of the world where the 40s was recent. You know what I mean? Like it's felt so long ago. And then like 90s, 2000s, 2010s, those do blur together in a way that it doesn't feel like, even 9/11 doesn't feel like some moment where it was like, although the geopolitical stage changed, it doesn't feel like how the world was constituted and what it was made up by that changed. Like things are still mass produced, things are still digital, like that is like, it feels more constant in that sense.
Yeah, I don't remember if he used this word in the book, but he was basically alluding to like the homogenization of culture over the past couple decades. And it's like, it really does blur together. The caveat to that, though, is that I remember thinking in the 90s, I was like, oh man, it's weird that every era had a look to it and a certain fashion style. And we just don't. Our clothes look totally normal. But now when you look back 20 years, you go, no, those clothes definitely look like the 90s. So I wonder if in looking back, what feels very homogenized now will feel a lot more stratified in the future.
Yeah, funny enough, the Stoics do kind of talk about that. He talks about like how different these names sound. He's like naming off the different emperors and they're like the most powerful people, like how the names sound so anachronistic and weird, even though like they thought that they would be remembered forever. And it is weird, like how the things that seem like a big deal like just with the passage of not that much time suddenly don't feel like being such a big deal. And then the things that you thought were normal, as you're saying, like with clothes, you're like, oh, I'm just a normal person. I'm wearing a regular shirt and regular pants. And you don't realize the degree to which the things you're taking for granted are actually the products of trends and fads and of the moments. And then you look at the pants 20 years later and you're like, that's so lame. Like that's like, I was trying so hard, even though I thought I wasn't trying.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to see that whole fish tank when you're inside of it, I think.
But the other thing is like, okay, so 15 years ago, it doesn't seem that long ago. But then if you think about who you were or I was 15 years ago, that seems as distant to me as the 60s. Like I have no conception of who that person was or was thinking or doing because it's like another person to me.
Yeah, that I agree with completely. Does that bring you shame? Like, does that make you feel negative feelings when you look back at yourself from 15 years ago? Or do you just accept it as, hey, I'm a work in progress, it's all good?
That's a good question. I think it's both. There are definitely moments, as the word very much of the moment, there are definitely moments of cringe when I look back. Definitely with writing, like it's also weird to me. So Trust Me, I'm Lying, my first book is 10 years old. This summer is 10 years old. Yeah. And actually Obstacle came out 8 years ago yesterday, which is also like insane to me. When I read stuff that I wrote that long ago, the thing that strikes me, it's not that I feel shame, but I sort of feel like I was being way too certain, or like I'm sort of embarrassed at the forcefulness with which I held opinions and expressed those opinions that now in retrospect, since I don't agree with, I think, wow, that was stupid.
Yeah. Yeah. Any of those beliefs that you're binding too tightly to, it's like, you don't know anything. Like, I got into a little bit of an argument with a guy that I've been in this group therapy thing for like 10 years. And there was a guy in there that he was saying the truth is the truth. And I know what it is. And like, because I was arguing that there's a lot of ambiguity in things, a lot of gray area, and it's some of this stuff is unknowable. And he said, no, I know it for a fact. And I said, yeah, but I've been in this group with you for like 10 years. I remember 8 years ago, you had different stances on things. And he goes, yeah, I was wrong then, but I'm not wrong now. It's like, come on. If you accept that you were wrong then maybe you just shouldn't hold too tightly to those beliefs.
No, I think one thing, reflecting on who you were in the past, it should make you more humble and less tightly held to your opinions now, because you're like, it's like, okay, you felt some intense amount of pain, like you stubbed your toe. You're like, that passes, right? The same will be true with the opinions or the things that you're really worked up about, because their significance in the world changes, you change, the facts change, whatever it is. I find certainty and arrogance do not age well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what positions could you possibly hold in your 20s that are just going to continually stand up? Going back to your cringe thing, now, I think sometime in the past 5 years, I've gotten to the point where I can flip through photos and go through old emails, and I can do it kind of peacefully.
Yes.
But for almost my entire history up until about 5 years ago, to even look at old photos or to look through old emails would make me cringe so hard that I would like close the laptop and I couldn't even do it. I couldn't revisit the past and the acknowledgement of like who I was. I'd be like, nope, looking forward, can't look back.
Back in the ancient world, philosophy wasn't abstract, it wasn't theoretical, it was designed to help you live the best life. In Stoicism 101, we have a 2-week course that will introduce you into philosophy, that will make you a better person. There's interviews with me, daily lessons that will challenge you to be better, give you new ways of thinking, tackling the problems of life, becoming your best self. As Marcus Aurelius says, you could be good today, but instead you choose tomorrow. Epictetus says, how much longer are you going to wait to demand the best for yourself? Check out our new course, Stoicism 101, at dailystoic.com/101. Yeah, the Stoics talk a little bit about being kind to yourself. I think it's hard to look back at who you were and what you were doing and not be very judgmental. Yeah. in a way that you wouldn't be that judgmental if it was another person. Like if you were looking at an embarrassing photo of someone from the 90s, you would laugh. You'd be like, oh, that's so funny. But you're like, what a loser. You know, like it's meaner when you look at it with yourself for some reason, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, but the counter to it is that we often grant ourselves so much more latitude than we're willing to give others.
That's
like
true.
you'll judge somebody by a soundbite or by a single wrong action when you yourself, like, you know that you're a more complete picture, and that you would hope that nobody would judge you by the single screw up thing you said on your friend's podcast.
That's true. We do that with sort of what they're calling cancel culture, which we don't need to get into a whole thing about. But like the idea that like the person that said this thing in a moment of anger in a private communication 20 years ago, that is fully who they are. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? And that you don't have tons of those skeletons in your closet. Like it seems like I remember there was this one, it was like the editor of Vogue or Teen Vogue or something. She'd like said some racist things in like emails or on Facebook when she was like in college. And like the main person who'd attacked her and gotten her fired, like it turned out she also had done that. Like it's, you know, it's that idea of not casting stones and sort of reminding that like everyone was an idiot 10 years ago. Like, and you are in 10 years, you will think of yourself as an idiot.
Yeah. I mean, you knew me 10 years ago, 15 years ago. I was a real idiot.
But no, that's what I was actually going to ask you some version of how do you think about it? Because that seems so different. And we were both sort of we'd both inherited a set of certain opinions about how the world would work and how things were going to go. And then we both had our own sort of issues and demons that we had to deal with. How do you think back to who you were then? And could you have imagined that 15 years later, you'd be like a builder on the internet who sells like plans for exotic tree houses? Like that's the other thing that's really humbling is like conceiving of where, could you have conceived of where you are now then? And like just how random life is and where it takes you.
Yeah. I couldn't have conceived of it at all. Yeah, I think that just speaks to something about like the uncertainty of your path. Like you just don't know the direction things are going to go. And that kind of goes back to what you were saying about being a little bit softer with like the opinions and the things that you hold on to dearly. Cause like that certainty, I don't know, it's just going to bog you down. But yeah, I don't know. Like 15 years ago, I think that I was a very different person. I had a very different outlook. I was a lot angrier. I didn't really have a sense of who I was. I didn't have a lot of confidence in myself. I didn't really feel like, you know, I loved myself and that therefore like other people would kind of like me. So I was sort of trying on a lot of different hats and identities, which you sort of saw a lot of back then. And I just, you know, I couldn't have imagined like the path that things would take. It's, you know, a strange turn of events. I mean, and I'm sure the same for you. Like you had your eye on writing, but you know, beyond that, like you couldn't really predict the trajectory things were going to go on.
Yeah, that's why I think it's weird when people have very specific goals or ideas. I think you want to have like a general point on the horizon you're aiming towards. Yeah. And then you have no idea the terrain that's going to exist between you and there and the obstacles you're going to encounter. And you have to be willing, I think, to be flexible and adjust to the facts as you find them along the way.
Yeah. I mean, it's a long journey. Yeah. I mean, you're just going to come up against so many impediments. And I mean, it's like that, you know, the Mike Tyson quote about everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. You know, like you can be fixated on this is my life goal. This is the thing I'm going to do. Like I've got but it's not going to work out that way. It's just not going to pan out the way that you need it to. And if you're not flexible enough, I feel like you're just going to break.
And then like, I do remember you being a very angry person and that being sort of who I thought you were. And I remember being very surprised meeting, like seeing you for something or talking to you something several years later. And then this would sound like the absence of that. It was like, it wasn't like there was a hole, but that was like what you were built around. Right. Yeah. So it was weird to see that disappear and then like, I guess anything could have rushed in to fill that hole. Right. And then, but like I think very rarely do you see it get filled with the opposite of what was there before, which is a roundabout way of complimenting you, which is, I think you replace what was anger with like a lot of kindness and niceness, which again was very unexpected, weirdly.
Yeah. I mean, I think if I dig down deep and I kind of look back through years of therapy and self-examination, the problem that I had going on was that I didn't feel good about myself. I didn't feel confident. I didn't feel like I had a sort of identity in a craft and a trade. I'm sure plumbers feel really good because their contribution to society is that they plumb. And I didn't like my stuff was a little bit more open-ended. And because of that, like I thought like I'm going to be rejected. And one of the ways that I pushed back against that, or I felt some power, is like, I'm going to be angry. I'm going to push back first. I'm going to control the situation. And, at least I can kind of, garner an identity as like, I don't know, an angry, volatile person, which isn't much of an identity at all. But that's coming from a place of like yearning, right? Like I want the community. I want the friends. I want to be accepted. I want to feel like I have a place in the community and something to contribute.
Like preemptively rejecting it.
Yeah. And so if I can eventually get to a place where that's sort of quelled, and like you said, now there's a vacuum, like what's going to rush in? I mean, the things that I was sort of yearning to fill it in, and I was just doing it in a very misguided way, are like, okay, community building and feeling good about myself and, creating an identity and a craft and a trade. And so now, like, I find myself in a place where I'm working very hard to build friendships and build skills, working with my hands, doing a bunch of like kind of community building type things that all the stuff that I do in terms of building is really just like, making stuff with my friends and wanting to, be a part of workshops and put on workshops, that type of thing. And so like that's filling the void that I was, I don't know, kind of replacing before with anger. Because I think you look at it as the polar opposite, but really it's just like, what is that anger a placeholder for? And now like I can confidently sort of, you look at what I've got going on now, and I think that's what the anger was a placeholder for.
It's also weird, lucky, fortuitous, I don't know how you want to say it, but like, so you have this coping mechanism, whatever it is, it's anger, it's an addiction, whatever the thing the person has. And it's sort of a not constructive, it's destructive, right?
Yeah.
And so you get in this sort of downward spiral with it. But then if you switch to something that's positive, that makes the world better, sometimes you get lucky and it becomes a positive feedback loop. So like, you did that. I remember you did the first thing with the swings where you put up the swings all over San Francisco and LA and people started liking it, and then it got attention, and then it became a Coke commercial. But like, I think about that as like you kind of trying on a very different thing and it being rewarded and creating a different kind of loop. Do you know what I mean? Like, and I kind of think about that with my career too, whereas like I was on this marketing track and was very successful and was making money. I wouldn't exactly describe it as constructive, but the Stoicism stuff becomes suddenly, it's like, first off, I'm interested in it. First off, I like it. But then because it actually does something for people in a way that's not extractive the way the other stuff was, suddenly it becomes this whole thing. And you can sort of build your life around this new thing that, because it's making the world better, you actually get encouragement for, as opposed to just like, like things you like you're not forcing it. It's the opposite. You're being like pulled instead of pushing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that speaks to the flexibility you were talking about before, because it took, stumbling into those paths to find that positive feedback loop. I just kind of, I liked playing in the park with friends and hanging out and doing some weird things, but like hanging those swings and sort of touching upon like, this has some positive thing here. I'm doing something that's creating a feedback loop that's helpful. And same thing with building stuff out in our land and finding that, working with my hands and that kind of design and trade like had a positive thing. And you with Stoicism, like, I don't know, it's not like 15 years ago you had said, I'm going to build a career and a path about writing about the Stoics. Like you had to stumble into that and to be open to the sort of direction it might go. And then to also recognize, here's here's something positive in my life. People are vibing on this. It's working for me. Like maybe there's something here. I should pull this thread a little bit.
What is weird, because people ask me about that, like they sort of like, so I was interested. I read the Stoics before I met you. So this would have been 2006-ish.
Yeah.
And I was interested in that. That's what I wanted to write about. And that's what I was writing about on my blog that nobody read. But
I read your blog.
Yes, I read yours as well. But we were like the only ones. But like, I just remember, like, I think people think about it as like, I was on this marketing track for a long time and then I switched. And they didn't realize that actually one predated the other. It was just sort of like, I say this and trust me, I'm lying. You know, the word disintegrated, right? We think of disintegrated means like falling apart, right?
Yeah.
Like a plane disintegrates in the, in the air, but it also means not integrated, right? That I sort of had these different parts. Like I was interested in this thing. I was interested in this thing. I was interested in this thing. I was ambitious. I was young, whatever, but it wasn't all, it was not put together in any sensical way. So like most of my energy and time and ambition was dedicated towards this one career path. But really the thing that I was interested in and cared the most about was this other thing.
Yeah.
And it took a longer amount of time for them to be integrated, for me to get rid of the stuff that wasn't working, for me to ramp up the stuff that was working. But it was just a weird period. That whole, like my whole mid-20s was just a weird period, or early 20s.
But that means that somewhere along the way, there was an alignment of like how you saw yourself and the things you wanted to write about and how the public was seeing you and what you wanted to write about.
That's right.
Does some peace come from that? And just before you answer that, the reason I'm bringing it up is there's, I can't remember who it was now, but there was somebody that used to write about addicts, and they were talking about the thing that addicts were sort of medicating away was this disconnect between how they saw themselves and how they felt the world saw themselves. And because there wasn't an alignment there was a great dissatisfaction.
I think that's right. It's like you can be very good at something. You can be very well liked for something. You can be very well compensated for something, and it not be what you were meant to do.
Yeah.
And if you're spending most of your time doing what you're not willing to do, or being the person you're not willing to be, I think that causes a kind of distress or suffering that you can either address by looking in the mirror and making hard decisions, right? And like painful, costly choices, or you can go get drunk, or you can work a lot, or you can have you can be consumed by your sex life, or, you can get in trouble. Like there's a bunch of things you can do to distract you from that distress, or you can address it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think distress is the right word for it. Yeah.
Well, the Buddhists, it's dukkha, I think is how you say it, but it's like suffering or like pain. It's just that it's just the things that cause you distress, and, how do you treat that distress? Do you get to the root symptoms or do you get to the root causes, or do you medicate the symptoms more and more until eventually you reach some sort of crisis?
Well, yeah. And I mean, speaking from experience, the risk in that medicating away the symptoms as an addict is that you build up these patterns of avoidance and you never really learn how to deal with it, to begin with. And I mean, it just gets harder and harder to dig yourself out of that hole.
Yeah. And just you're doing a thing compulsively and then it becomes its own. You do it. You don't even there's this great expression that traditions are solutions to problems we forgot about. Right? So if you think about why do we do it this way? It's probably because at one point someone was like, we should solve this problem. This is why we have this policy, you know? And I think oftentimes the things we do or how we spend our time are solutions to distress or anxieties or fears or bad advice or, things we've internalized. And then we do them for so long that we don't even remember why we do them. We just do them. And it feels painful to not do them, or it feels stupid to stop doing. You're like, I make $200,000 a year as an executive at this company. I should just leave it because I actually have more fun doing X That sounds insane. You know what I mean? And so either, this is obviously the plot of Fight Club. Like he has this life that deep down he knows is wrong, and his subconscious has to destroy it for him to be able to leave it. And I think that is, flaws of the book and movie aside, that is a very common modern predicament.
Yeah. I mean, then it brings up a complicated relationship with like bucking convention and changing things up. Because on the one hand, you go, well, this has probably been done this way for a while. But on the other, sometimes like it feels like you need to kind of shake things up and do it a little bit differently. There's also like when it comes to behaviors, like, how many, I know I keep coming back to the addict thing, but like how many alcoholics have said like, well, now I think I can have a drink because like things are going pretty good for me. And they're forgetting like the reason things are going good for you is because you haven't been drinking. So like there's that push-pull relationship with I think that I should change things up dramatically because there might be some good that'll come from it, or to buck convention of how things are typically done. But then on the flip side of it, it's like, well, perhaps things have been done that way for a reason, and perhaps you shouldn't rock the boat too much.
Yes.
Yes. I don't know, which I guess goes back to the very first part of this conversation, which is like not holding too tightly to any one idea.
No, I think that's right. No, so it was fast. I don't think I would have predicted the direction you ended up going, but it's been very interesting to like. I think that's the other thing that I do like about the economy and how the world works is just like you really can do. Like you can have weird jobs, like that can be a thing that you do, right? Like you're like, oh, I bake tree houses for a living or whatever. Like you're like, that's a thing, you can do that. Even now, I think like it's like, oh yeah, I talk about an obscure school of ancient philosophy. That's my job. And they're like, oh, did you go to philosophy school? No. Like, oh, do you teach at a university? No. How does it work? I don't know. It just works, like so that is the tricky thing about those conventions too, is like some of them exist for a reason and some of them are totally made up dumb stuff. And you have to know which ones you can sort of knock the legs out from under.
Yeah. Yeah. You talked about this on your podcast with Chuck Klosterman. You're talking about movie making and like some of the approaches there, and like, well, why do we need to do it this way? It's like, well, there's a reason, because everybody's been making movies this way for a while. Like they've worked out the kinks. Not all conventions need to be bucked.
Well, no, it's extra tricky if you have built a career breaking conventions. How do you then respect the conventions? Right.
Yeah,
so like
totally.
Like you look Elon Musk, right? Every company, everything he's ever done, they're like, that won't work for the following reasons. Right. Mm-hmm. But I saw this at American Apparel. If that becomes your identity, like I break conventions. I don't think about what those people, the DJ Khaled, I don't listen to what they say. Well, sometimes, in fact, a lot of times they are right. Right. And so you're like, if you develop this sort of, this is where what I think the colloquial definition for this would be ego. If you develop the identity that you intuitively and instinctively know better than everyone, eventually you will bump into the thing in which that is not true. And that will be your Waterloo, like rock bottom crash. That will be the thing that brings you back down to earth.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've been seeing a bunch of stuff on social media in terms of like people's profile pictures and their bios, talking about making fun of the fact that folks are into the current thing, whatever the current thing is. And
Mark Andreessen talks about this.
And so there are many people I've come across now where their entire identity is pushing back against that, to lampoon it and to say, I am not for the current thing. Well, if that's your entire identity, pushing back against the conventional wisdom of whatever the population is generally into, you are also going to find yourself in a position at some point where you are absolutely on the wrong side of a topic. Like you can't just bind that tightly to the like, I buck convention. I do what others tell me I shouldn't do. I do what they say we shouldn't. And they are wrong about the current thing. Like to just push back against the nebulous they is always going to leave you in a bad place eventually.
Yeah, well, Peter Thiel says, like it can't just be you put a minus sign in front of stuff. Like that doesn't work because eventually it's you're putting the negative sign in front of a life-saving medical technique or what. Like I saw that. I saw Andreessen and Elon Musk talking about this the other day, where they were like all of us, like they were talking about free speech and this and that, and then all of a sudden they're like opining about like SSRIs and antidepressants, and it's like, look, first off, you might be right. The chances of you being right are very low because you have zero understanding or training in this thing. And also, this isn't the same as speculating about, whether the Patriots should draft so-and-so or not, right? Like you're talking about a thing that millions of people depend on or believe they depend on to literally not commit suicide. So maybe just shut the fuck up, because like you know what I'm saying? Like this sort of intuitive, reflexive, like my identity is I challenge whatever those people think. And I think what's happening, and you and I both know some people whose identity has been warped by this, because those people were rude to you or dismissive or wrong about you in the past. Your identity is now fuck whatever they like, believe, care about. So it's even pettier than just like, I think the opposite of whatever the crowd thinks. It's more like spite, like politics of spite. Like, I don't like those people, so whatever they like or think about or support, I'm going to reject, even if they happen to be right about this, that, or the other. And it takes you down a dark corridor.
Well, I mean, that now you're just speaking to like the sort of national division and culture wars in this country.
Of course.
But also like where you're talking about Andreessen and Musk, that's the downside of that positive feedback loop we were talking about earlier, where you see success in a thing, you get rewarded for your expertise in one sector, and like society loves you for it. You got fans, you're doing well, things are great, and now you feel comfortable stepping outside of your lane. I've seen what's his name, the astronomer guy.
Oh, Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Neil deGrasse Tyson. Like, I've seen him speak about a few things where I think he got really enabled by such a positive feedback in terms of like his contributions to the scientific community and, specifically in his field. And then he'll speak about other stuff that's way outside of his lane. It's not quite as far outside of his lane as Musk talking about SSRIs, but it's like, I don't know, man. I think maybe you should just keep talking about stars.
Well, I read an interesting study once that was saying that, oftentimes conspiracy theorists are like, obviously there's the Alex Jones sort of whack jobs out there. That's not who we're talking about. But like the people that propagate the sort of real big conspiracy theories are almost always academic experts in something else. So they're an astronomer or a sociologist or an expert in this kind of medicine or on this diet. And what happens, this is what ego does. Ego makes you think, I'm an expert here, I'm an expert in all things. Like you carry on the certainty built from years of study in X field. You carry it around like a backpack. When they talk about privilege, the invisible backpack. The uncertainty is the certainty is your invisible backpack. Like you're just walking around convinced that this thing that you thought about for 3 seconds is rooted in the same 20 years of study as your scientific observations in that exact field, and they're not. And that's why you're being a crazy person.
Yeah. I mean, you hit the nail on the head with that word certainty. Like that's what I've kind of come to see as the poison. And it creates like a little bit of a weird relationship with the truth, because I want to feel good about certain things. I want to listen to experts when they tell me I should do this or do that. But by and large, like certainty, real diehard certainty is something that I see as, a negative thing in my life. And I certainly don't appreciate it generally when I tend to hear it from most folks. Like, I just, how can you be so sure about everything? I mean, and of course, that's a conversation that used to be less problematic. Now we're dealing with people who think the earth is flat. And I feel like you can be pretty certain that the earth is a sphere. But yeah, I don't know. That certainty and ego, like it's been poisonous for a long time.
Well, that's a tricky part too, right? So like, conspiracy theorists that like say believe the world is flat or anti-vaxxers or whatever, they're like they're wrong about a lot of stuff. But you have to then go, you can't be like, well, what does Alex Jones think about X? I think the opposite of X. Right? You have
that reflexive pushback.
Because you're actually doing the same thing. You have to go, putting aside what everyone thinks, what do I think about this independently? Do you know what I mean? Like politically, like let's say you find like Musk repulsive for like the things we were just talking about him saying and other things. Like if you then predict he's going to be a failure and everything because you don't like him personally, that's going to cost you. Right. Yeah. Like, or if if you are repulsed by this political figure and therefore reject every part of the plank that their party or that their campaign is built on, you're going to miss the handful of things that they're actually not wrong about. So you have to have this discipline to be like, that's what Thiel told me. His definition of sort of being anti-mimetic is, mimesis coming from the philosopher René Girard, is it's not that you just do the opposite of whatever the crowd is. It's that you try not to think about what the crowd thinks and you try to come up with your own opinion based on as much independent information as possible.
Yeah, and the benefit of that is that whatever certainty that affords you in the moment, that philosophy means that you're always open to new information. So you're flexible, you're moving with it, you're allowing your opinions to be changed, which frankly, these days is about the biggest compliment I can kind of give somebody, is that I see that their opinions are sort of open to be changed with new information. Yeah.
All right, I wanted to ask you about something. So you sort of built up this whole new life, and then suddenly all the work that you'd done literally burnt to the ground. Talk to me about the fire and how you responded. Because I remember finding, again, for a person who'd been angry and had some issues in the past, I remember finding your reaction to it I remember finding it remarkably self-controlled and calm, considering the circumstances.
Sure. You want me to give a little background on that property? It's not just you and I here, right?
Yes.
So like 6 years ago, my wife and I, bought a property up in the mountains. It was just like a piece of dirt, recreational land. We were like, okay, we can't really leave our house just yet. We don't want to leave the city of San Francisco. We want to have a place where we can kind of like host friends and gather and, like spend kind of quality time that we'd done at like friends' ranches and Airbnbs. So we're like, we're going to buy this land and we're going to kind of build it out. And then we just spent the next 4 years building. And when we entered into it, we didn't have much of a skill set. Like, you having known me for like 15 years, you know that I was probably the guy you might call over to help you try and fix your dishwasher, but I didn't really know I tinkered, but I didn't really know what I was doing building wise. And so we just started plotting down this road of like, okay, we'll bring some friends over and we'll clear some trees and we'll build a picnic table. And then we'll bring some more friends over and we'll try our hand at like a little pavilion. And then maybe let's organize a big weekend get together and have a friend fly in from out of town. And we'll try building a deck up in the trees, like a little treehouse deck. And we just kept doing that until after a few years in, we had a cabin. It was like featured in magazines and stuff. We had a network of tree decks, a wood-fired hot tub up in the tree, a very nice outhouse, sheds and hammock stands and hammock hooks in the trees and a fire pit and a little network of trails. Like we built out this full little adult retreat center. It was just for us and our friends to use. And when we would do these big annual gatherings or like weekend hangs, the invite list, what started out going out to maybe like 6 or so people, toward the end there was going out to about 60 or 70, just because the build parties and the big hangs and stuff, it just attracted like-minded people, good quality friends of friends, that type of thing. So we had, got archery and axe throwing, summer camp vibes. It was just a total Zen retreat space that everybody loved. It was like a place and a reason to gather. We had a bunch of friends that would fly in a couple times a year. It was a whole thing. It was really beautiful. And then California wildfires of 2020, one came through and just burnt it all to the ground. And I didn't really touch on this a second ago, but like I mean, we built out the plumbing in that place, all of the trails, every bit of infrastructure, the roads, like other than planting the trees, if there was anything there that looked like it had a human hand on it, it was something that we did. We didn't really hire anyone to do anything. So yeah, 2020, August 17th, I think, wildfire came through and just annihilated it. Nothing was left standing except for like the larger trees. All the small ones burned, everything that we built. Roads remain, but that's about it. And yeah, my reaction to it was I said this a bunch of times to people, and it's sort of the cliche thing to say, but I don't mind losing the stuff so much because it was the experience that was gained and like the quality time with friends. And I have a bunch of caveats to that, but the reason the cliche is true, and I'm not just saying it to sound nice, is because during the past 5 years or so of building there, and there was just a lot of personal growth. I really came to understand who I was, to see my value in the community, to kind of come to love myself and, the sort of service and identity I provide. It enriched the relationships that I had with friends. It cemented like a firm feeling of like, okay, I know who I am. I know what I can do. I know what my contribution is. Like I figured out who I was in that place. And I figured out what it was that I kind of desired in life. And we saw enough of it through that even post-fire, it's like, okay, what I'm left with is such important lifelong lessons that, that can't really be taken away. The caveat to all that is that what goes hand in hand with it is that thing was a huge social tool.
Yeah.
It was a reason and a place to gather. Like I said, we had friends flying in and we're doing big events. And the truth is, good habits and good practices and good community, like those things are all great, but they're certainly enabled by the tools that can enable them. And having that infrastructure in that place, like, socially things have taken a little bit of a hit, but it also came during the pandemic and people leaving cities and stuff. But yeah, it's
Didn't you tell me you looked at it kind of like a mandala, that Buddhist kind of art where it's like you make the thing and then it wipes it clean and then you get to do it again?
Totally. And I mean, we've, built a new outhouse and a new little A-frame cabin, and I'm currently working on putting in some new water. I will concede that the drive is a little bit different just because there's a mild amount of trepidation. So, in terms of investing like a lot of time and money, it's like, well, maybe we don't go at it at the exact same speed as which we did before. The approach is a little bit different. But yeah, it's total mandala. Like the truth is, what I really enjoyed from that place was seeing a project through and doing it with friends. So we'd get together for a weekend. I would have all the plans in place in terms of amassing a bunch of lumber and tools. And, I've thought through every bit of this because you only get one shot at it. And we're going to do a wall raising and we're going to build a pavilion. Building that thing in a weekend and sitting underneath it on Sunday and eating with friends and that kind of shared sense of accomplishment of this thing didn't exist, but now it does. Like that's all I was really living for. And that was the best part for me. And then just like having it in perpetuity, I can take it or leave it. And if you wipe the slate clean and you tell me that I just get to do it all over again and I get a fresh project, it's kind of exciting. Because it's just, I don't know, it's the process and not, ultimately having the thing at the end of it.
Well, that's kind of that way in writing, right? Like you're writing something and then the computer eats it or it gets destroyed. Theoretically, you could just write it again because it's in your head, right? You can't take away the idea. And you can still there's you can see it as an opportunity to do it again better, right? But There is something less fun about doing it the second time in that it's not what you have lost is the first timeness, right? Like you've lost doing it uniquely for the first time, which is probably why driving back from a trip is not as fun as driving there. Like you already saw it.
Yeah. The comparison I would make to writing is I don't look at this property as a single entity where it's like I did it once and now I'm doing it again.
Sure.
Instead, it's just sort of a venue for this continued process of like learning how to design and build and host events and gather. So it's kind of like if you wrote your book, you completed it. You closed that laptop and you were like, it's done. I've finished it. Maybe even sent it off to the publisher. And then for whatever reason, they just lost all the copies of it.
Yeah.
But like that satisfaction of like you kind of saw it through, that's what I have. It doesn't exist in perpetuity. It's not still on the shelves for people to buy. But like I saw that project through and now I just get to kind of start on the new book. It doesn't really feel to me like the computer ate it halfway through, if that makes sense.
That requires a certain philosophical understanding that the thing was process, not outcomes. Right.
Yes.
So if the purpose for doing the book was where it hits on the bestseller list, or if the purpose of the book was impressing fancy people or whatever that stuff is, then the losing of the manuscript is the tragedy. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I did this book, I did Lives of the Stoics. Obviously, I wanted to do well, but part of the reason I wrote it was there was a bunch of Stoics that I didn't know very well, right? And so even if that book had never come out, or even if it had sold 0 copies, I would be better because of what I learned to write the book, right?
Yeah.
And so if you can think about doing the things, to me, that's the ultimate distinction about process versus outcomes. Are you doing it because you enjoy the process? Are you doing it for what you get out of the process? Or are you doing it for what happens at the end, for the reward at the end of the process? Those are very different mindsets. And one is much more fragile and vulnerable to what happens in the world than the other.
Yeah. I mean, I hate to like just categorize something as wrong or worse, but it feels like you're hanging a lot on that second one, things that are beyond your control. You just don't know how it's going to turn out.
That's right. You know, in Obstacle, I tell this story about Edison, and this is when his Menlo Park laboratory burns up. And I say this line in all my talks because people love it. But you know, he rushes in, his factory's on fire, and he finds his son standing there, and he goes, "Go get your mother and all her friends. Will never see a fire like this again." And I love that because it's not just like I'm not going to be bitter about it afterwards, but also like, man, this is cool. Like even if you're like, it's like when you're a kid, you build I do this with my kids all the time. You build the thing. The fun part is knocking it down, right? Like It's not that you made it and now you have to protect it forever and keep it exactly as it is. That is not only not fun, it's the opposite of fun because now like you're walking on eggshells and you can't, you're scared all the time. And I think that one of the tragedies of people who become successful or do stuff is that you become very risk averse. You become very protectionist because you can't fathom not having what you didn't have not that long ago.
Yeah. I mean, it's just a dangerous road to go down because now, I mean, there's just so much that's beyond your control. You want to steel yourself against all the things that are bound to happen in the world. Yeah.
And don't you think, like I wrote an email about this a while ago, which is like, obviously you're scared about someone taking this thing from you, your house burning down, even losing people that you love. I was saying like, they can take it from you. They again, life can take it from you, but it can't take that you had it from you. If that distinction makes sense.
Oh, of course.
And if we can remember that, I think it does make us much more resilient. It's like, yeah, the marriage blew up, but like the 10 years were good. And you can't take that away. Like I control the memory of the thing, short of Alzheimer's or whatever, is always yours.
Yeah. That's it's funny you talk about the marriage there. People talk about like, failed marriages. Yeah. The marriage failed after 20 years. They talk the same thing about businesses. The business failed. Like, yeah, but it was doing well for like 25 years. Yeah. Right. Like, it didn't fail. Like, yeah, there's an idea that something's supposed to persist in perpetuity, I guess. Yeah. I've said this to a bunch of people. Like, I wish I could have seen the cabin burn down. It must have been an awesome fire.
Yes.
The handle, when Molly and I went back to the wreckage, we were thinking we might be able to salvage some souvenirs. I thought like, my cast iron pans might be in there or something. The handles melted off the cast iron pans. Our stove melted. The wood stove that's supposed to hold up to a fire inside of it, it melted. Yeah.
That's crazy.
It
Yeah.
must have been awesome.
Yeah. Just think about the sheer power of nature
Yeah.
and what it can do when it's at full force it's humbling and then also literally awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in the truest sense of the word. But yeah, I mean, if you think about that, who am I to think that I can control that? Like you can't control against that. You can't stop the power of a fire that's so strong it makes trees explode from the sap boiling inside. So it's a mandala.
Yeah, to me, the saddest part about a fire like that is not the buildings, etc. No offense. It's the things that can't come back in terms of like this tree took 100 years to become what it is. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? When I think
sure.
about it's not even a loss because I guess it's nature, but just like when something like that happens and eventually it will come back, but it will not be something that you are able to appreciate.
Yeah, I mean, the landscape is going to be forever altered. Things are looking better over at our property now because there's new growth and we got rid of a bunch of the dead trees. But those trees are black, and the bark is on the redwoods is going to remain black for hundreds of years. Like it's just always going to be that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, on the flip side, like I don't know, I got a bunch of random commenters on the internet who were lamenting the damage to the forest. The forest is fine; it's part of its process.
Probably better. Yeah.
Yeah, the redwood trees, like their bark is fire resistant. They're fine. It's just the shit we put in the forest that burns.
Well, and it's your anti-mandaliness, right? The like, I like this forest the way that I saw it when I was a kid, or the way I was there, as if it's not just whatever forest is there since they clear cut it 100 years ago, since before, like we have this sense of like keeping nature the way we like it, as if nature itself isn't constantly changing and going different directions and doesn't care what we think about it at all.
Yeah, well, that's one of the flaws in those very rigid arguments that are always pushing for we absolutely need to preserve this or go back to this or whatever. They're often predicated on a very small snapshot of time. It's like you forget that these things have been in a constant state of evolution for so long. Your desire, your demand that we need to go back to how things were at the time of European contact, or just the way that you like remember them as a kid during your formative years. Like, no, that's when it was best. No, that's when it just was. Like, it just, things are constantly changing and evolving. And you're right. Like I don't know, we like them to stay the same. It's a human thing that you kind of have to fight back against.
Well, let's talk about the new book, which I loved. I love the idea of thinking intellectually about a thing that we often sort of see almost as anti-intellectual. Like when I was interviewing Steve Rinella, we were talking about like how the high five was kind of recently invented and like different techniques. It's weird to think like every single tool in this book was like a massive innovation. Like, like someone was like, what if we put, like someone designed each one of these things and it literally, in some cases, changed the course of human history, that someone was like, if you do this, suddenly, boom. But we just take it for granted.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I'm standing in a house and, you are as well. Most people don't really look around their houses and consider what it took for it to kind of get there. But yeah, I talk about this in the intro of that book. Like, our history as humans is chronicled by the tools that we've used. Like people talk about the Stone Age and Bronze Age. And big shifts in humanity in terms of what we were able to accomplish and how we were able to shape our landscape came around when they figured out that new thing. They're like, holy shit, I can make a saw blade out of metal and put it on a stick. And like all of a sudden the world's different.
Well, I was telling the kids this morning, we were on a walk along the river, the Colorado River, behind the bookstore, where you helped us install the tree that now towers from floor to ceiling. And there was like a tree in the middle of the river that had fallen down. And I was telling them, I was like, okay, the pine trees that grow in this town, originally Bastrop was a lumber town. And I was like, guys, this is going to blow your mind. But at one time, there were not trucks and there were not trains. And so how do you think they moved these giant trees after they cut them down? How did they get them all over and I was explaining that they would cut the trees, roll them into the river, and then float them from Bastrop to the Gulf of Mexico out. And then it was like, so they didn't, because they couldn't travel them on roads, they would just float them down like hundreds and hundreds of miles of curvy river. They would float these logs down until they got out to the open ocean, and then they would load them onto boats and they would take them all over. And I was also telling them, they love this, that like what would happen is these massive bottlenecks would happen. Like one tree would go sideways and it would create enormous log, like literal log jams, and they would just blow it up with dynamite. But anyways, just when you think about just how hard the world was and what a major intervention one of these minor inventions must have been, it's kind of, it's insane to consider.
Oh yeah, completely. I mean, just figuring out leverage the wheel. Look what the wheel has done for us. You don't hear people talking about it a lot.
Yeah. But so what is your fascination with tools? Is it what tools do for you? Is it what goes into tools? Like, why do you end up writing a book about tools?
It is the ability to create, to like make something that didn't exist before. Because I don't know, like, or just to repair things, which I think comes with a feeling of capability.
Sure.
And I like feeling capable. It makes me feel kind of powerful, makes me feel like I have something to contribute, makes me feel like I'm worth something. And I don't know, it stands in contrast with a lot of folks that I've met who do not feel capable. And for them, like, that's a sort of, I don't know, it's a detriment. So I don't know, it's knowing how to wield a tool, knowing how to speak that language, knowing the landscape so that you can go into the hardware store to ask the right question, because it's a sort of like, it's an unknowably vast thing, right? But if you have enough of a base knowledge where you're like, okay, I can talk to the repair guy, or I know how to research a problem to solve it. It puts you in a position where, I don't know, like, I can solve problems. There's a hammock stand in my front yard right now, and there wasn't yesterday. Yesterday, I was like, I kind of want a hammock stand here. And I realized that we just moved into a new house, and my friends used to live here. He left a bunch of lumber in the backyard. I was like, I can make a hammock stand from that lumber. And I made it. And my wife was here and her parents were here, and they were marveling at it. And she laid in the hammock and she got some joy from it. Like, I don't know, just being able to create that to, I don't know, like, to shape my world, fix problems. It's just great. And you can't really do that without tools. And I mean, it's a broad definition. Like, this book, I tend to cover tools that are just in the shop, garage, home, apartment, that sort of thing. But the truth is, like, if you're cooking or knitting or whatever, like, the world's full of tools. And so they kind of enable us humans to get shit done.
It sounds like you're also talking about the distinction between, or the link between, confidence and competence. Like, yes, when you know how to do something, when you have a skill set or a base of knowledge, it allows you to be like, yeah, I can handle that. Or it allows you to just be more resilient because okay, it won't go the way I want it to go, but I believe I have evidence in my ability to figure my way out of here.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'm on this planet for like 80 years or something, if I'm lucky, and feeling like I'm not too scared by the process is pretty important. And, as we're social creatures, feeling like I have something to contribute to my community, like, that seems pretty important. And tools and just a general competence and confidence about, like, I know how to problem solve, I know how to fix things, I can make stuff happen, I have a trade. They enable all that immensely.
Yeah, that makes sense. What do you think of the remark from Aristotle that the most important thing in life is figuring out how you spend your leisure time? Like, the idea that you figure out what your hobbies are. Like, what do you do with, like, your free time? It strikes me as you have a pretty good answer to that question. What do you think of the question?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's just Aristotle getting down to, like, what matters to you, because yes, like, that's what you do with your free time. You do the things that matter to you. And there's that incongruence between the things that matter to you and the things that you have to do. As we said before, kind of brings you a lot of displeasure and discomfort. I was about to say, like, a lot of folks would strive to figure out how to, do the thing you love and you'll never work a day in your life. And there's kind of some truth to that, but it also seems like a path to pervert the thing that you love. So there's,
Sure.
I don't know. But yeah, it computes for me that you want to figure out, what is it at my core that I value? What are my values? What matters to me? If I don't have anything standing in my way, what do I want to do that's important to me, and how do I want to spend my time? And I'm very fortunate that I've stumbled down a path that has put me in a position where that's just all of my time now. I don't do anything that I don't want to do. I work on projects that bring me joy, and I help out friends. I drove halfway across the country to help you put that tree up, and it makes me very happy that I was able to do that. Like that's a sort of dream existence for me. I figured out. Yeah.
That was the last thing I was going to ask you, which is, you told me that the sort of Stoic idea of Memento Mori was in part, or was part of that, like, why am I spending my time on this? How am I going to spend my time?
Yeah.
Walk me through how you came to that, why you decided to give up a pretty well-paying job to change your life to just sort of do cool ass projects.
Yeah. For years, I have been inching closer and closer to kind of that position and a decision point of, like, I could leave my job to spend my time doing the things that matter to me. But it is so hard to make that jump because you're sitting on a cushy paycheck. It's stable. It's got nice health insurance. I was making more money than I've ever made for what was honestly probably the easiest job I've ever had. And it's very difficult to turn that down. And every year that goes by that I'm going deeper into it is just like more money that I'm saving for retirement or more money that I'm socking away. Like, the math says you shouldn't leave your job.
Yes.
So I kind of kept putting that decision off for quite a while. And then somewhere deep into the territory of thinking about it, I don't know, I got like your 7th email talking about, the Marcus Aurelius quote of, like, you could die tomorrow. Let that determine what you say and do and think now, something to that effect.
That's exactly.
And I do remember that one of those struck a bit of a chord, and I was like, fuck, like I could die tomorrow, and yes, I made the decision. I was like, all right, like I'm actually going to leave my job. And that I left it. I made the decision to leave, and then my property burned down, and I still left. So I was like, no, like this is, I made the decision in large part to leave and to focus on things in my property. And even after it burned down, I was like, well, it wasn't the place, it's the process. I'm still doing this. And now, like, I just spend all my time working on personal projects and projects with friends. And it was absolutely the right decision, but it came in large part from thinking about that quote. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. People sometimes are like, why do you say the same thing over and over again? Well, because not everyone gets it the first time, for starters. And, it's not like there's anything in that quote that you haven't heard of. Like, we all know you only have so much time and blah, blah, blah. But it's like, can it get you at the right time when you're in the right position? It's the timing of it is everything, right?
Yeah.
Like, and this is the other Stoic idea of we don't step in the same river twice. Like, are you in a position where it can hit you? Then it might work. And you might have to hear it like 500 times before it makes sense to you.
Totally. I mean, it just doesn't always land the same way every time. You got to be in the right headspace. And then also I think that it's, kind of the tenet of advertising, right? To like continually keep planting the seed. And eventually, if you see Coca-Cola enough times, maybe by the 10th time, you're like, I think I need a Coca-Cola. So, I mean, I think that it works that way a little bit as well. Like, you planted that seed and it was in there sort of like gnawing away for a while. And then, one day you read it the 8th time and you're like, it lands a little different today for whatever reason. And it motivates that change.
Yeah. That, what's the expression? When the student is ready, the teacher appears.
Yeah. It's been good. I appreciate it. Thanks for blasting those emails out all the time.
Yeah, of course. That's my job. I like building those. I like the ephemerality of, like, I wrote this thing it will go out to a group of people, and then it might as well not even exist anymore. Do you know what I mean? Like, and then so 6 months later, I can do it again because everyone forgot what I said the last time. But those are the things that I like building. I like the little puzzle of the daily email of it. You know what I mean?
I totally get it. Yeah. I felt similarly about the book and finishing it up. Like I felt really good about the research I put into it and figuring out how to organize all those different tools and to sort of catalog those things. And now that it's done, I'm good. Like I don't actually care if anybody buys it. Like I'm satisfied.
Well, don't tell the publisher that, but I very much relate to the expression. All right, man, this is awesome. I appreciate it. The book is great. This is my marked up copy that you gave me. And there is a physical manifestation of it, not just in the store, but at my house in the tree house that you helped me build also.
Nice. I'm glad that thing's still up. It hasn't collapsed yet.
It has not collapsed yet, and it's going strong.
Cool. Good talking with you, Ryan.